Welcome to the Cube series. I was inspired to make these awesome cubes after seeing Crowline's amazing cube pins. They make such amazing art, make sure to check them out. Now I made this series for my first ever art show, along with a bunch of other amazing artists for Strange Cat Toys, and it was so much fun. But everything needed to be small, under 2 inches. And I'm going to make a matching grublet that matches each design and theme. And I just got these 3 earthy colors. You can use whatever color you want. I really love this granite with a tiny bit of sparkle. And we're starting off with our 1-inch cube. I got these off Amazon. And here I'm just going to roll out this clay. I want it to be an even thickness. That way it looks right and it's also going to bake right. And of course my favorite, Bacon Bond, also known as Bica Bond. And I stick my cube onto the clay and just cut it to size. You want to make sure it's stuck really good and that there's no air bubbles trapped under there, or it will cause you issues later. Now we're going to finish the bottom of that first layer with another strip, just making sure it's even. Some call me a perfectionist, don't judge. Now we're going to go ahead and use some of that Bacon Bond and secure it to our wood. And now that we got our first layer attached, we can start blending in all of those edges, so it looks like one complete piece. You can also use a hard surface. I'm using this glass tile to help make sure that everything's nice and even. And then I'm using a cutting blade here to trim off any excess. And then I realized that I had transferred clay onto the next layer, but then I went, hey, happy accidents. And it looks really cool, so I'm going to keep doing that for the rest of the layers. Now we're going to add on more Bacon Bond and add our second layer. Now once you have this second layer on, you're going to blend the 2 layers together. If you don't, they're going to look separate and weird, so we're going to go ahead and blend them. And now we're going to do it again, but this time I'm not going to fully blend the clay. This is going to leave some nice little stripes and cool little organic features like real dirt. And just doing the same as our first 2 layers. And you can see it's starting to look really cool. Once again, blending all these layers together. This one, I wanted the blending to be more uneven, so I just pushed the clay around to get that kind of effect. So it's not a perfect straight line. Now I'm using some scrap clay to test out my worm and how I want it to be placed. And once I figure that out, I'm just going to use a tool to mark those areas so that I can cut the clay out. I'm using these clay cutters, which come in so handy, and I use them all the time. And they make cutting holes into clay a cinch. Now that I have my holes, I'm going to texturize this cube. We want it to look like dirt. But first, I'm going to cut off the excess on the top. Now I'm just using an old head to my electric toothbrush that I cleaned. It's not all gross. And you can see it gives a nice little dirt texture on this. And now I want to make this look even more realistic, so we're going to add some stones and rocks that are stuck in our little clay layers. So I'm just making some uneven pieces of clay, cutting them up, chopping them up, and as you can see, they make some very convincing teeny tiny rocks. And then I just used some tools and tweezers to help me get those rocks exactly where I wanted them and pushing them into the clay so they don't fall out. You can also use a little Bacon Bond to help them hold them in there. And after baking, it's nice and matte looking. And here we're going to start on our leaves. So I know these look really bright for leaves, but I add in some dark brown and I get some really nice colors. Now making a leaf is super easy. You just want to start with a teardrop shape. And then using a tool, you're just going to put in your leaf lines. I like doing it on my finger because I can get better shapes and moving around better. Then you're going to want to pinch the end where the stem is and make a little bit of that stem and then pinch the end. And voila, a little tiny fancy leaf. Now I just went ahead and made different sizes and different colors of leaves. And now we're going to put them on the top of this cube. This is going to be our top layer of the cube. And I just arrange them in a way that I find looks good. It's kind of like a little puzzle there, trying to figure out how they fit in. And once I got everything situated in the way I like, we're going to chop off those edges so we get that nice clean cube look. And then I like to round the edges so it looks very done and nice looking. Now we're going to start with some white. I like to mix my white with some pearl, whatever polymer clay you can find. I had Cosclay, so I'm using that. It gives the white a nice little shimmer. Now I'm starting off with this kind of teardrop shape, and then I'm going to add 2 little circles right there. And if you're like, Nicole, that looks like a booty, that's because we're giving our little mushroom friend a booty, because little tiny booties will never not be hilarious and adorable. So we just want to shape those cheeks. And of course, give a little tiny butt crack because it's hilarious. And you can see I'm just blending those pieces in so it looks like it's part of the little body there. Now for the legs, I take 1 ball of clay, cut it in half so I have equal amounts of clay. And I'm just making these kind of little nubby pieces and doing a little dancey dance. And then I'm just going to blend those into the body. And you can make your legs and arms however long you want, however chunky you want them. It's totally up to you. Make sure they're blended in good so they don't fall off or crack during baking, and there you have some cute little legs. I'm going to do the same thing for the arms, and then once they're attached, I will position them how I want. And here I'm just flattening the bottom of the feet because I thought it looked cute. I like having some scrap clay nearby so that I can pick lint out of the white clay, which is the one downside of white clay. And then I'm going to skewer this poor little guy like he's a little shish kebab so that I can work on him without smashing all the details. And one detail I want to do is a little crystal belly gem. So I made a hole with my ball stylus, added some bacon bond, and put the crystal in. Now I'm using some clay softener. This is going to help get off any lint or fingerprints, and now I'm going to bake it. I always like to put my white in a container so the dust stays off of it. And then after baking, I like to use some sandpaper to get rid of any large imperfections or any lint that's stuck to the surface. And now he is soft and smooth and adorable. Now we're going to work on that top part of our mushroom cap. I'm just pushing it into the figure and seeing how I like it, changing the shape a little bit here and there, and then I can take it off and start adding the details that go on the underside of the mushroom cap. I decided to try out adding this little detail to kind of separate the top of the mushroom from the underside. You can also do this with paint, you don't have to sculpt it on, and I end up doing that later. Here's a little foreshadowing for you guys. But I'm just blending it into this piece and making sure all my details look really good, adding more of these details and gills if that's what they are. And make sure to use bacon bond, especially when you're attaching an unbaked piece of clay to a baked piece of clay so they stick together. And I'm so proud of myself right here until I realize he's way too big. You guys, he's huge. The whole piece needs to be 2 inches and my cube's 1 inch. I really messed up. So I had to make a whole nother mushroom. This one's much smaller and a little more simpler, but still as adorable and still has a tiny booty. Now I want this figure to sit in the leaves, and I realized that of course once I smacked him right on top and he was just kind of floating there. And I was like, no, this is not gonna work. So I pushed him into the clay, and then I just removed the clay where I could see the little imprint of the body. This is gonna make him look like he's kind of part of the leaves and sunk into them like a real mushroom. And you can see that looks so much better. And sometimes you don't figure those things out until you're doing it. So any excess bacon bond, I like to go ahead and just remove with a brush. And here I have these awesome little glass beads, and I was like, we gotta use these. It's gonna make it look so magical. They are finicky though. And did I lose a lot of beads that just rolled all over the place? I sure did. And once I'm done sculpting an area, I like to go over it with a little alcohol and a brush to get rid of any fingerprints and lint. Now it's time to make our cute little worm friend. And the great thing about worms is that they're easy to make. You're just taking a little rolled piece of clay and then making these lines. And worms, they got a lot of lines. And I figured out that rolling this in my hand to get those lines works way better than trying to do it on a flat surface. Now I'm just making sure that my worm pieces are the correct lengths. Then I can put some Bacon Bond in those holes to help secure a little worm friend. Once I have all the worm body parts where I want them, I'm just taking little rolled balls of clay and sticking them around where the worm's coming out of the cube. This is giving some interest and kind of that 3D effect, but it's also helping hold our little worm guy in place. And you can see how much better it looks once we add the little dirt pieces around the holes. And now you know your little worm pieces aren't going to fall off. After that, I'm going over it with some alcohol to get rid of fingerprints, and it's looking pretty good after baking. Now I just took some purple and brown paint, mixed it together and watered it down to do some details on our little worm friend. Of course I had to add a tiny little face. Oh man. Once you start adding the eyes, stuff gets really cute really fast. Look at them. Okay, now for my favorite red paint. And it was a new bottle. You are welcome. This red paint is amazing. But anyway, I like to draw on where my lines are going to be, because if I just freehand it, it's not going to be a straight line. It's not even going to be close to a straight line. So I'm doing lots of thin coats. That's always the key when it comes to painting and getting a nice finish. It takes more time, but it's always worth it. Now to add those details on the cap. Do I know what they're called? Nope. So we're going to add some of those cute little thingamajigs right on there. And of course I couldn't leave the leaves alone. We're going to add some gold details to those guys. And of course our worm needs to be a little bit slimy. So we're going to add some gloss paint to him. And then I'm going to also put some matte finish over the paint on the cap. And some gloss varnish on the eyes. Now I also made one of my signature grublets to match this piece. I sculpted all these tiny worms and then I cast it in layers to make it look like dirt layers. And don't forget about our other little guy. I wasn't going to just leave him in the cold. Now I wanted to make him an ink cap mushroom, so I sculpted the little inky bits out of Cosclay, which is bendable after being baked, and then I did a sweet little paint job on him. My daughter loved him so much, so she claimed him and he lives with her now. Thank you so much for watching this video and watching me make the first cube in my cube series. I can't wait to show you the rest of the designs. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out.